Christopher Stanfield, a West Texas native, fell in love with writing at 14, inspired by mythology, science fiction, and fantasy. After a brief college stint, he spent 20 years working in IT at a hometown bank. But his passion for writing never faded. His debut series, A Season of Angels, launched in 2020 with its finale published in June 2021. His new series, The Adventures of Apple Rose, is his latest endeavor, with Book 3 of the series due for release on October 31st, 2024. With a possible 7 books in the series, and perhaps more in a spin-off series or 2, Chris will be busy writing for the foreseeable future. In today's episode, he shares the inspiration behind his writing passion. We explore his approach to sensitive topics and his ability, as a male author, to craft believable female characters. You'll hear Chris discuss genre blending, offer insights into self-publishing strategies, and share tips for successful marketing. All that and more as we delve into the dark mind of Christopher Stanfield. This is the Brewing Fiction Podcast. And welcome to another edition of the Brewing Fiction Podcast. Quite happy to welcome Heather back after a little hiatus.
Hi, good to be back.
And let me speak for both you and I when I say we're pretty stoked to have our guest today, Mr. Christopher Stanfield. Chris, how are you? Welcome to the podcast.
I'm doing good.
Welcome.
Thank you.
So Chris is one of my friends from, I guess we've known each other for a few years now.
Yes.
Met on social media and then just kind of all blossomed from there. So Christopher is one of my favorite indie authors. He writes a lot of gothic, like urban fantasy type stuff that I just love. He seems to have a really great following. People love his books and his serials on Bella. We have so much to talk about today. He's got a new book coming out. He's got this whole new series, the follow-up to his first incredible series. I mean, he's just so prolific and so inspirational to me. So welcome, Chris. We're so happy to have you here.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about yourself, Chris.
Well, I'd always wanted to be a writer for a long time, but my original goal in high school was to go to film school. That was what I wanted to do at that time.
Okay. Yeah.
And so, but then I got married. I moved to California and kind of didn't do the school thing at that point, and then got into a career in IT. And that's sort of been my life for the past 24, I think, of the years that I've worked in IT, and published my first book in 2020.
Yeah, so you've done so much in the last 4 years.
Yes. In such a short time.
Yes,
Yes.
that is incredible.
Yeah.
Wow. I didn't realize it was 2020, honestly.
I know.
Yeah,
It's crazy.
Yeah, but again, you just inspire me with how much you do. You have a full-time job, and then you publish everything yourself and market everything yourself, and
You
it's
probably
amazing
you probably don't sleep much, hey, Chris?
Yeah.
Probably not.
Yeah, when do you sleep?
Crazy.
So, our next section is the Fast Five.
Okay.
Okay. So when you write, do you like to write a great plot twist, or do you prefer the cliffhanger ending?
Cliffhanger.
Cliffhanger, awesome.
Yeah,
I love those.
yeah.
Those are the best.
Yes.
Do you like plot driven, or are you more character driven in your
Character,
stories?
for sure.
Character, yeah.
You know what? I've been
Characters.
just a little bit of introduction that I've had to your work here in the last couple of days getting ready for the podcast is I can see a very deep relationship you have with your characters. Even
Yes.
I haven't been
Great way to
lucky
put it.
enough to read your work yet, but you can just tell. So
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Are you a summer or a winter person?
Summer.
Yeah,
Yeah.
me too. I
I
love
kind of
summer.
oscillate, but between the two. But yes,
Yeah.
summer if I'm on the beach.
Yeah, yeah. Oh gosh,
Summer in
you're on my.
West Texas, no.
Where are you living now, Chris?
I live in a small town in West
In
Texas. I
Texas.
grew up out
Okay.
here. Yeah.
So you know winter a little bit. I don't think Heather really knows winter. You want to come up and join me in Canada if you want the winter.
I lived, yeah, my only experience was like real winter with snow is when we travel. I can count
Mm,
on like one hand the number of times it snowed here. Right, we're so
yeah,
close
right.
to Florida, we just don't get much
Mm,
snow. So when it is, it's
Yeah.
like a freak
Yeah.
occurrence. The whole town shuts down, it's like,
Yeah. It,
it's
it
a
was
trip.
it was in 2020. I think I had a hip operation, so I was stuck at home for 2 months,
Mm,
and it snowed a foot
mm,
one winter. And we have snow occasionally. We have ice storms that can happen out here,
yeah.
but that was the first
hmm.
time I had seen that much
Yeah.
snow. It was crazy.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That is
yeah.
crazy. That's a
Indeed.
lot of snow. I wouldn't know what
Yes.
to do and all of that, honestly. All right, so let's go ahead and just jump into our interview. We have so much to talk about. So, Chris, what sparked your passion initially for like reading and writing?
Oh gosh. Like I said, when I first began, I said I wanted to. The film school is where I wanted to sort of go into. I loved the movies. I loved the writing in certain
Hmm.
movies. There were certain movies that had kind of inspired me to want to become a screenwriter. So that was my
Wow,
goal
cool.
originally. I've always wanted to tell stories. It was just the
Hmm.
way I wanted to tell stories has always sort of changed,
Hmm.
Right.
like over the years. I
Hmm.
remember from a very early age, like 8, 9, I wanted to be on the radio,
Hmm.
and
Oh, yeah.
and then that sort of evolved into screenwriting because I fell in love with the movies, and then at the time I got to high school is when I started to write, like really write like
Yeah.
books, to write the short stories, and that was really when that took off.
Okay.
Awesome. Yeah, that's kind of how my journey kind of started. I felt like I really got serious in high school
Hmm.
with my writing. But I loved it for, my whole life,
Yeah.
Yeah,
you know.
My
It's
love comes from reading because in high school I was awful at writing.
and and for me, I think one of the other things that was sort of a drive is that, and you may have already have heard this from me. I have a stutter, and I've had a stutter since the age of 5, and discovering that writing gave me a sort of a voice that I couldn't find. I've always felt like I didn't
right,
have a voice. Like
Hmm.
I
right.
couldn't articulate the way I wanted to articulate because
Yeah,
Okay.
I would have to
Interesting.
avoid certain words because certain words were harder to say than others. I would
right.
refuse to speak up in class. I always remember teachers, particularly in English classes or history classes, asking questions and for us to raise our hands. We had the answer, and there was no one else in the classroom raising their hand. I'm thinking, I know the answer, but I don't want to talk.
Yeah,
um, but
Yeah.
with the writing, it gave me finally the opportunity to be heard, and that was a
yeah.
big thing for
Wow.
me.
Wow.
Wow.
Now that's a
Yeah,
good
that's
way to.
awesome.
Yeah,
That's great inspiration.
That is that is just amazing how writing can save us all in some
yes,
different way,
yeah,
you
Yeah.
know, and you
oh for
never know
sure.
how it can save us like that. That's amazing.
Thanks for
Yeah.
sharing that, Chris.
Oh,
Yeah,
oh, you're
Yeah.
welcome.
that is awesome.
Yeah, you're one of the most prolific authors that I know. You have this A Season of Angels trilogy,
Hmm. Hmm.
and then you have the spinoff Vela series
Hmm.
from A Season of Angels, so that's
Yes.
something else. And then you have this whole new, very daring series about a cheerleader serial killer, which is
Yes.
amazing. And you self-publish everything that you do.
Mhm.
So how do you keep up with everything? You have a full-time job, you self-publish everything. How do you do it all?
I learned after the first experience with A Season of Angels, I wrote everything at the same time, like back to back, and then I'd have book one with my editor while I'm working on the book two, and then I'd be ready to publish book one while I'm editing book two, and then sort of that was that was what I first did, and that was the burnout I had after that experience
Mm,
was ridiculous.
yeah.
And so now I've kind of gone to where I have to focus one book at a time because I just can't. I
Yeah.
learned from that first experience. I can't do that because I was staying. I remember it very well the third book in that series, the finale to the Season of Angels series. I wrote it, the first draft, in a month.
Wow.
And that was
Wow.
staying up till 2 o'clock in the morning and then having to get
Wow.
up for work the next day and being like,
Oh.
after a while, I was like, I can't do this. It was
Wow.
too much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's burning the candle at both ends for sure.
Yes.
Yeah. That's really tough.
But
So you had to.
I'm glad I did that too, because my biggest problem before I started to really write, before I published my first book in November of 2020, I would write a little bit here, I'd write a little bit there, and never really go anywhere. I'd managed 5 chapters and then get bored, and then my life would take over and I'd work, and
Right.
so getting to the point of actually completing a book took me a long time, like
Mhm.
10
Yeah.
years to write the
Yeah.
first book.
Yeah.
Okay.
And once I did that, I was like, okay, now that I'm done, I'm here. I want to push this momentum. So I'm glad I did that with the first 3 books. That really got me past a lot of the excuses that I would latch onto with not completing the first book. So the burnout was worth it to that extent.
Yeah. So, and it is good when you can learn things like, okay, I've done this. I know what it's like
Mhm.
to do it
Yeah,
all like boom, boom, boom.
yeah,
Yeah.
Kind of like Peter Jackson with the Lord of the Rings trilogy.
yes,
They're filming them all at once,
yeah,
all 3 at once. So
yes,
it's kind of like what you did.
yeah.
That's amazing. Wow. I don't know how you were able to do all of that. That's a lot of,
It was a challenge. Yeah,
yeah. So what was the very first thing you ever published?
that
The first book in the season of
yeah, that would be
Angels?
the first book that I had done. I remember in college, my first year of college, well, right out of high school, I went to a community college that is here in town, a local school, and I wrote a short story for. They had this anthology they were putting together, for the school. So I had
Oh,
written a short
cool.
story in 2 parts for that. That was the first time I'd really tried to write something and
Yeah,
get people to
nice.
read it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, and it
Okay.
takes a lot of guts that first time.
yeah,
Right.
But once you do, it's like you take that leap and it
yes,
feels
yeah.
kind of good. It's scary, but
Oh
then
yeah.
when you get that feedback, it feels good. It's
hmm
nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. So you got started in college. Um, so your first series, I read the first 2 books,
hmm
and like I read the first book and I was like, he's already one of my favorite indie authors. I mean, just right off the
Yes.
bat. I mean,
Thank
this
you.
is like it's like reading a traditionally published book. I would
Mhm.
never have known it was self-published. It's that good. It's just
Thank you.
amazing. Um, so first give just like a little short overview of A Season of Angels, and then we'll talk about how you came up with that wonderful idea.
It's a story about a teenage girl in the aftermath of a shooting at her school, who,
Mm.
in the aftermath of that very traumatic experience, discovers that she has something that seems like a magic power. And that propels her onto a journey that reveals to her that there's a world out there that she didn't even have any idea was real, where there are angels, there are the demons, and then there's the devil himself, who is coming after her. And sort of that
Oh.
first book is sort of the exploration of her coming to terms with this discovery and the fact that her life is now taking this remarkable turn.
Right, and that it will never ever be the same.
Yes, yeah.
But yeah, she has to come to terms with
hmm
so much in this book. And so how did you we'll get back to the characters in a little bit.
hmm
How
hmm
did you come up with this whole idea of this teenage girl who's got this, amazing power that even, the devil is coming after
hmm
her? How did you
Yeah,
come up with this idea?
I think what's interesting is every book for me comes about in a different way, and this story came about because I just one day had this image in my mind, where I just imagined. I think it was at work when this happened. I had this image in my mind of a young woman holding another young woman, her friend, in her arms, who has just been shot, and in this moment of her holding her friend and her knowing her friend's about to die and tears coming down her face, the bleeding stops, the wounds start to close up. And that was sort of the image that I had in my mind. I'm like, okay, what is this about? And then so
Mm,
from that image, I started trying to figure out, okay, why would this happen? What would give them, what would bring these two to that point in time? And then the story sort of
right.
came out of that. one little image, that I have.
One
Right. The
image.
one image. Yeah. And sometimes
And
that's all
that
it takes.
was in your mind, because some writers use
Mm-hmm.
different images online. This was just somewhere in your head.
It just at work, and I probably, as sometimes happens when you're dealing with some stuff in IT, it's kind of dull. You don't use your mind's kind of wandering, and you're daydreaming about as you're working on something, and that image just popped in my head, and it just captured me.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
yeah,
Nice.
So out of that one image, you've got 3 books and
mm-hmm.
then 2 different Vela series, and it
Yes,
all ties in. It's
yeah,
all part of the same universe. So, The Girl in the Storm, which is the first book in A Season of Angels, the first book I ever read of yours,
mm-hmm.
um, is, it opens up with this really nightmarish scenario
Yeah,
that we see all too often
mm-hmm.
on TV, but instead of seeing it, way back here, you're putting us
Mm-hmm.
right there, first person, in this traumatic experience. And I know it's had to be super hard to write.
Oh yeah,
this, but you do it with a lot of sensitivity. And it's the same with your new series, which we could call a pink horror because it is more of a female revenge kind of series about a
yes,
teenage serial killer.
mm-hmm.
Um, in this series deals with domestic violence and all that comes with that, very sensitive topics that
Yes,
you write about, but you do it with like just exquisite sensitivity. And coming from a woman,
mm-hmm.
I'm reading your female characters and these horrific things that they go through. It's just amazing how you can write this with all of the sensitivity.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you approach these delicate topics the way that you do?
Yeah, I think the first thing I do is I kind of establish what lines I will absolutely I will not go past. I
Right.
set the boundaries for myself because there are certain things that I just
Hmm.
don't have an interest to write about.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
in the school shooting, I didn't show that event itself. You come in the
Right.
story in the aftermath
Right.
because I didn't
Okay.
want to make it a gratuitous thing. It didn't need to be that. It
And
wasn't about the
and it
bloodshed
wasn't
and
at
the
all.
violence and all that. It was
Right.
about how you react to the trauma that comes after.
Oh,
Hmm.
It was
wow.
about the
Okay.
healing process past that. The same thing with the domestic violence. There's also a heavy theme of sexual assault in that
Hmm.
other series. That's another thing.
Yeah.
I will not write a rape scene. I just won't do it.
Right. Right.
I
Hmm.
have no interest to write that. But dealing with the trauma, dealing with how survivors will respond to that I'll go through. That I'll
Yeah.
will explore. So I kind of the boundaries help me in how I approach it. And
Right.
yeah, so that's the first thing that I think of. And on the topic of domestic violence, I'm approaching this from someone who has experienced it.
Right.
Um, I was in a marriage in '98, I think it was, that was an abusive marriage, emotional and
Okay.
some of the physical. And so
Right.
when I approach that, that's something I know I've lived
You
in
know
that
that. Yeah.
experience.
Yeah, it's
So
not
Right.
just fiction. It's
yeah,
it's
yeah.
real life. Yeah.
So that also
Yeah.
informs how I approach it too, because I know from my point of view how I felt going through all that,
Hmm.
and it helps in setting the boundaries that having had that experience.
Right. And you can sense that when you read your work. There's nothing gratuitous about it,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like, let's explore these themes through these fictional women,
Mm-hmm.
but it really hits home.
Yeah.
It's so real. Everything that they go through, it's very, very real, and you really immerse the readers um, into not only the characters' lives, just the world that they live in.
Mm-hmm.
So if I were reading blind, I didn't know your name, I didn't know who you were, I didn't know who wrote your books, I wouldn't know that you were a man. I would think you were a female because you write such great female characters. And some men just don't. They just
Can't.
don't know how to tap into that feminine
Yeah.
mystique, I guess. And
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
especially with the topics that you handle,
Yeah.
unpacking trauma
Mm-hmm.
from different experiences. And then you also even have like lesbian relationships. And you're writing this from a male point
Mm-hmm.
of view, and it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't seem like that at all. It's just incredible. How do you tap into women this way?
I think the first, well, there's a couple of things. I think first is just approaching anything with empathy is a
Right.
huge thing. I think if you don't have that, if you don't approach it in that way, if you don't see these characters as people,
Mm,
fully
Mm.
well created actual people, it's harder to do. If you just treat them as a caricature, it will never work.
right. Because your characters represent so many women, what
Mhm.
so many women have gone through. You know,
Mhm.
you've got young women who have gone through school shootings, you have young women who have gone through domestic, like, abusive relationships, sexual assault and things like that. Women reading this can say, "Wow, this was my experience," and you do it in such a way that it's just very sensitive.
And
And it's
and the
very
and another
touching too.
yeah, and another I think another for me another point of that too is when I grew up, the most important and I guess influential people in my life were the women in my life.
Right.
My dad is fantastic. He's been a great part of my life. But my mom, I had a grandmother that I grew up with.
Uh-huh.
She was probably the biggest inspiration for me
Aw.
as a person. Because she really that those experiences of having those women shape my life is why I write the way I do. It's why I want to write the characters that I do because she was such a huge part of just for me. Because I think it's always funny. My grandfather was this big, tall, loud. He was the kind of guy who when he walked into a room, he commanded the room,
Right.
except if she was in the room too. Which is always funny because I had never seen a person who could put him in his place with a look, with a word. He worshipped as big and tall as he was. He worshipped the ground she walked on.
Wow.
And sorry, I got surprisingly emotional at saying that. But yeah, I haven't really talked about that in a long time. But just that, seeing the way she was with him, and very independent, very strong-minded. She was a woman at a time when even today, to some extent, a woman at a time when you were supposed to be quiet and you know
Mm.
the
Mm.
the
Demure.
the man was the head of the house. So that was not the way
Right.
it was in her house. And it was
Right.
so,
Yeah.
and seeing that every day, that was what told me this is the way it's supposed to be. It's a partnership. It's not one person being over the other. And
Right.
seeing
Exactly.
how
That's how I
yeah,
grew up too.
yeah,
Wow.
Yeah, seeing that
Yeah.
kind of equality in the household. And I have a lot of really strong females in my life too. And I think, they come through a lot in my writing as
yeah,
well. That's really cool. I was really close to my grandmother too. She
yeah.
lived with us as well. So you've got a brand new baby. You've got a whole new series called the Apple Rose series.
Mhm.
Um, so tell us about Apple Rose. She is a very special girl.
She of as much as I have loved writing my first series, this series has been the most fun I've had as a writer, and I can't even remember, um,
Awesome.
because it's it's given me a chance as a writer to push some of the boundaries for myself. Because like I said before, when I write difficult things, I have the lines that I won't draw.
Right.
But when it comes to Apple Rose, when I say that I will never write a rape scene, but when I write what Apple does to the person who commits rape, the boundaries for me in that moment, I just like, no, they're gone. I don't care
Goes
about the
further.
boundaries.
Yeah.
I want to
Yeah.
see how crazy I can make this chapter, how
Right.
crazy I can get into the weeds of it. And it's been fun. It's been a fun experiment to kind of tap into the darker side of a character who can do these terrible things, but smile and laugh while she's doing it, and actually
Enjoy it.
enjoy it, and then to put readers in that position where my hope is that they'll want her to not get caught.
Mm.
I want to challenge the readers to, as terrible as she is at doing these things,
Yeah,
you are on her side the
you
entire
are.
time.
Right.
You
Right.
totally are.
Yeah,
Because she's not just randomly killing people.
yeah.
You know, she kills with a purpose. And so you're like you feel bad. You're like rooting for a killer. You're like go girl,
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you get a lot of that feedback from your readers?
Oh yes, I had a lot of people that have responded very well. The compliment you gave me about, if you read my books in a blind way, you would not know that I was a man. One of my favorite comments I got from a reader in the first book in that with Apple Rose was, she said, I was reading your book and seeing the relationship between Apple and her best friend Cindy, and she said, I see myself in this relationship to my best friend. And she said, I don't know how you wrote a female, like the friendship between two young women, because she said that she saw herself in those
yeah,
relationships, and that was
You
a
nailed it.
huge
Yeah,
compliment to me.
yeah,
indeed.
totally. And in that first book when they're still young and in high
Hmm.
school,
Yeah.
I can see myself in that, sitting in the lunchroom and you're all like giggly and you're talking to your best
Yeah.
friend, and
Hmm.
then you're seeing this, like, these light little scenes like this with Apple and Cindy, but what Apple is doing, and
Yeah.
it just changes all of that. But you still
Yes.
love her. She's like adorable.
Yeah.
She's so, and you love the relationship between Apple Rose and Cindy. It's just amazing. And like you said, the horror of what she does to people, you're like,
Yeah.
you're wanting to look away and you can't, and
Yeah.
you're like rooting for her at the same time. It's just so many emotions there.
When
Yeah.
it's justified, you want to cheer them on as bad as it
Right.
is.
Yeah, it totally
Yeah.
feels justified. Exactly.
And it was funny too, is for me, is I am squeamish as heck when it comes to blood. I'm watching a horror movie, most time I'm looking away, I'm cringing. But
I don't like gore.
and the writing it has been a challenge too, because then there's that, I can't handle this, but I'm having to write this.
Because you're
Yeah.
visualizing what
Yeah.
you're writing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's particularly when certain Apple does certain things. She has a penchant for removing eyes. So that's, for me, that's the
Yum.
hardest thing to write, because I
Oh
can't
gosh.
even watch my wife taking her makeup off with the Q-tip by
The
her eye. I'm
Q-tip.
like, I can't even look at it. And here I am, I'm writing a book where she's removing a person's eyes. So it's a challenge.
It's great to challenge ourselves too.
Yeah.
So for you, the challenge is writing these like really kind of gory scenes
Yeah.
that normally you would not do,
Yeah.
but you're enjoying it. And you can feel that when when I read through these, Apple, I was reading the serial when it first came out.
Hmm. Hmm.
You can feel how much you enjoy this series. Like you're
Yeah.
just having a great time with this.
It's been
And
fun.
I
Yes,
love
it's been
that.
fun.
Yeah. And you can tell it comes across in your series. And you've had a lot of really great support for Apple Rose.
Oh yeah.
And you've got a lot of merchandise
Yes, I
for the
do.
series. So yeah, tell us
Yes.
about the merchandise for a minute.
Yeah, I was just trying to think of a way to do some fun stuff that's not just about the books, but have stuff with my books on it. So I did some research and found a store that I like, an online store that I liked, and started working at doing some T-shirts with some quotes from the books, some funny quotes like that bad boys are hot, but Apple likes them cold. Um, so something to that effect, and try to kind of give some funny, cool sort of shirts and coffee mugs and stuff that have some of the quotes from the book or stuff like that.
Yeah. So do you choose those lines? Are those your favorite lines? Or is it from feedback that you get from readers that you choose to put on your merchandise?
Yeah, there'll be a line in the book that I like. There'll be something I'm thinking about. What's a funny way to market this book with a quirky sort of a line, and I'll think up one, and that'll.
Yeah.
I'm just looking at your store here. You call it murder. I call it art. I love
Yes.
that.
Yeah, because that's the big thing with Apple, is she isn't just someone who kills these people that are doing
Yeah.
these things. She also turns their bodies into art.
Wow.
Yeah.
She will display
Displays.
her
Yeah.
kills. Yeah.
Right. In
Yeah.
very interesting ways.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's always cool too, because you're always like, what will she do next? How can
I
she
know.
top this one? You know?
Right.
So yeah,
That is the
you're like,
challenge, because each new book I'm like, okay, I've done this. Now what do I do?
Now what do you do? Yeah.
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 yeah. And then plus, as Apple Rose grows and gets older,
Hmm.
you have to think of, you have to kind of change. Did you have to kind of
Hmm.
change the way you wrote for her, like how she kills or the way she kills? Did
Oh,
that sort of? change
completely.
over time.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
in the third book, there's now a 10-year, a leap. She was
Hmm.
17 in the first books. She's 28 in the
Wow.
third. So
Hmm.
she's now a young woman. Her She still has some of the same quirks about, the giggly sort of personality, but there's also more of an edge to her now. There's a more
Right.
of a sophistication. Um,
Mm.
Right.
I sort of hint in this 10-year gap that she went to art school. So now she's actually a trained
Artist.
artist. So there's more of a
Yeah.
sophistication to her now that she didn't
Oh,
have when she
nice.
was a cheerleader in high school. So there's it's fun to sort of like rediscovering her in
Wow.
this new
Yeah,
space.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, because she's so much older now. So,
Hmm.
do you find her like the scenes you write when she's killing someone, like, does she approach it with more elegance and sophistication than she did when she was 17?
I think she will. In the third book, there was more anger in the third
Oh,
book
okay.
because there's some
There's some rage there.
there's some rage there because someone has managed to squeeze their way into her life, and by doing so put her life into a sort of the danger she's been hoping to avoid.
Yeah.
And so
Right.
she's at this spot where she's been at peace for 10 years, and now this person is squeezed into her life, and she's not happy. She doesn't know if
Yeah.
to trust this person. So there's a lot of anger, resentment, and just distrust, I think, at this stage. The third book comes out at the end of the month on Halloween. I'm
Awesome.
working
Oh,
on
nice.
the fourth book.
Oh,
And
awesome.
so that's that. And this now we're going to get more into the elegance of what she does, because
Yeah.
in the fourth book now she's on a mission, and so there's more of a deliberate thing
Oh, okay.
happening in the
Okay.
fourth book. So that's fun to explore too.
How to see her evolve. So,
Yes,
yeah, I read that you expect it to be at least 7 novels, right?
yes. Hmm.
Are you
Wow.
still at that number, or do you foresee further?
I'm still at that number.
Okay.
There's also a potential idea I have for one of the side characters. She's a reporter. I've got some ideas for a series that would just be about her.
Okay, like a spin-off type of thing?
Yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
Okay.
if I
Okay.
do that, there are going to be some of those books would come in and out of the others, depending
Wow.
on where she is at different points in that story. And I've got another idea because you'll learn in the first chapter of the first book of the Apple Rose series that Apple has had a great grandmother who did the same that she does.
Oh.
And so there's a lot of the mystery around her. So I've got ideas in my mind of doing
Oh,
a
pretty
story about her.
cool.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
Oh, now
Which,
that would be really great.
yeah. And I jokingly refer to that idea as the Downton Abbey meets the Dexter.
Oh, yeah, because this
Yeah.
would be like early 1900s probably
Yes. Yeah. At
for her.
1900, she's her. Yeah. Her great grandmother was the daughter of an English earl.
Hmm.
As when she grows older, 18, she marries a marquess. So she's in
Hmm.
that sort of that English aristocracy.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh,
So yeah,
wow.
very
That
much sort
and
of the
that
Downton Abbey vibes with a lot of the murder.
Yeah, like Downton Abbey meets Dexter. That's such a
Yeah,
perfect tagline too to market that because people
yeah.
would eat that shit up. I'm telling
Yeah.
you. That's awesome. I
Indeed.
love that idea.
Indeed.
Awesome. I love that.
If I tease about the next stuff I'm going to write in Apple Rose, I get a couple of readers who are always asking me, "So is this about her grandmother?" Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome with it. So now
yeah,
you know, like people are definitely interested, and so
mhm,
that would be a
yeah,
great avenue to explore at some point. And
Yeah.
hmm,
that's exciting how many ideas you have coming off of this series too.
yeah. That
Yeah.
that
So
Well,
that
yeah,
that's fun. Yes.
yeah. Even to
that's
get to
awesome.
7 books with Apple, you're gonna have, as Heather alluded to, like she's maturing. So to write
Hmm.
another 4 books,
Yeah.
she's probably, who knows, maybe it's going to be a span of 50 years. She may at some point be an old grandmother
Yeah.
still doing what she does, right? So,
Yeah, and I think honestly, I think the last book I have in mind would she'd be very right next to my age. Right now, she'd be in the 40s, and
okay.
Hmm.
and
Okay.
so I've got plans for Apple going from 28 to 30 to 40. So you'll
Yeah.
join with her on this whole journey. The third book, Apple is in Scotland. The fourth book, she's in Paris. The fifth book, she's in Italy, and so I'm sort of taking her on this, this sort of a trip through those countries. So that's been a lot of fun.
Have you been to those countries?
I've been to Paris. My wife she's from France.
Okay.
So,
do you speak French? Like,
no, I don't yet. We've been married for 19 years, and I still don't speak French. Though my wife, her mother loves to teach me the curse words in French.
Okay,
So that was the first thing she started teaching me.
I think that's what everybody wants to do when they first start learning a new language. Teach me the cuss words first. So who are some of your biggest influences, as far as like, who are some of your favorite writers who have influenced you over the years?
Well, I think, when I was growing up, there was, of course, Tolkien was a huge influence. I'm a major geek when it comes to Middle-earth. In fact, the first stories I wanted to write weren't even the stories, that I'm writing today, the urban fantasy and this with Apple Rose. That wasn't even the stories I wanted to write when I was growing up. It was the fantasy. It was science, the fiction. I think when I was in high school, the first book I wrote by hand was inspired by the X-Files.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. I had this whole idea in my head, and I wrote it by hand between school. Between my classes, I had my notebook, and I'd be writing this book. So so Tolkien was a big thing. I know that like of course, like Stephen King has been a big influence too.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and I can see that in your Apple Rose series for sure.
I bet you all enjoy that because I'm a huge Stephen King fan. So if I could just step back for a sec, that book that you wrote by hand, your first book, we'll say, did you ever publish? Do you plan on publishing?
And I wrote it by hand and I lost it.
Oh no!
Years ago. Oh yeah.
Bummer.
That is a bummer. Too bad.
And I remember enough of it that if I wanted to, I could go back and I could redo it.
Okay.
I remember enough of the premise. I think what inspired that at the time was I was a huge like an X-Files fan when it came out. I was in high school when it first had come out. And as much as I love the X-Files, it made me think, what would it be like if I told a story not from the perspective of someone who's on the outside trying to find the truth, but a story from the point of view of the people who are already that are on the inside, who know the truth and are trying to keep it from getting out.
Right.
And that was what that spurred that story, was sort of to flip it.
Kind of where you are in Apple Rose, though, a little bit, right?
It's kind of like that way, because in Apple Rose, it's not really a mystery of who's the killer. It's her.
Right. We know who the killer is from the beginning. So it's a whole different story.
Interesting. Interesting.
Yeah, because with Apple Rose, you want to delve into her as a character.
Yeah, and that's not to say there's not some mysteries in Apple Rose, because there are, obviously. But
yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So how do you, like, with Apple Rose? To me, it just blends so many different genres. So what do you call Apple Rose when you yourself say, okay, Apple Rose is this genre?
That I'm still having issues with it, honestly, because
like how
there's
do you tag it?
there's the mystery element, there's the horror element, there's the romantic element too, because you see over the course of the series that Apple Rose and Cindy develop this. There's a romance that develops between them across the series, and the romance that develops between Apple and Cindy is really, for me, the heart of the whole story.
Right.
And seeing what they go through, coming to terms with how they feel, and then there's an event at the end of book 2 that gets in the way of that, and then the book 3 is them trying to find their way back to each other, and so there's that element too. So
because you have Cindy's entire story, loving her as a friend, and then also loving her in another way, but then also being unsure about her because she knows what she does.
Yeah.
And that's got to be so hard, and what a character to explore. I mean, you could do a whole novel series on Cindy alone. I know you said you were going to start one, right?
I have an idea.
Series?
Yeah, there's that 10-year, the gap between the second book and the third book. By the time you get into the third book, Cindy, for the last 8 years, has been a cop. And when third book comes in, Yeah, when the third book comes in, she's about to be promoted to detective. So I had this whole idea of what I could do to show what she was going through in her first years as a patrol cop, and the challenges she had to face, because not only is she now at that time period a rookie cop, she's a rookie cop who had a best friend who was a killer. And so how do the officers around her look at her, knowing you were the best friend of the East Bay Ripper? So, there's that sort of,
Yeah.
Yeah.
East Bay Ripper. That's good. That's cool.
Yes. So that's an idea I have in mind. I don't know yet if I'm going to do it, but I have it in mind. There's a couple stories that would follow her as a rookie cop, and then a little bit further on in that time to sort of show the challenges that she had to face.
Wow.
So will you put that out on Kindle Vella first as a series before you do a novel, or will you just jump into publishing it as a novel, or?
Yeah, probably not. I think that for me, Vella, I've left that, behind. I had a good time with it, but I think I'm sort of past that point, and I'm ready to move on to just straight publishing the book. And
right, just writing and publishing. So is it?
Yeah.
So there are some good things about doing a serial, because you can, as you drip out chapters on Vella or whatever platform, you can kind of build your audience, build up excitement about, this will be a novel in print at the end of this.
Yeah.
Become a part of this journey. You can help me kind of go through the story. You can help influence the story, and that's a lot of fun. But also at the same time, it's like 10 times the work because you're writing and then also having to market while you're doing that. Possibly.
Right.
If you're writing while you're, dripping your chapters out.
Yeah.
So you've done both. You've done the serial to novel approach, and then just straight to novel. What do you like the best?
I think each one has some things I like. I think when I was doing the Kindle Vella, I liked it because it kept me where I was doing the writing on like a regular sort of the basis. I was always like,
right. It gives you deadlines.
Yeah, it gives you deadlines, and you can focus on just one chapter at a time. Okay, just write this chapter, get it done, put it out. Write the next chapter, get it done, put it out. That was good. It was sort of created it helped me build the discipline to write.
Yeah.
And it changed the way that I approached that. And I think it also too, it helped me because I've always been sort of a writer who would always, before I'd write, I do like an outline, not a detailed outline, but just a rough sort of very basic outline. Writing with Kindle Vella, and after I got out of that experience with the third book in Apple Rose, I decided to try without an outline at all.
Just diving in.
Just diving in. And that was challenging but fun, and I found out that I could do it. So that was exciting. Yeah.
So have you stepped away from being a planner then, or do you still do more planning than not?
I do the planning. I just don't tend to write it out. Like when I start a book, I know the ending. Right before I start to write a book, I know exactly what point I want the story to get to. I kind of know where I want the middle of the book to be, because I'll think of a twist or something to happen in the middle. And so I know those points. And once I know those points, then I can just start. I'll think 1-2 chapters ahead. I'm working on chapter 4. I'm thinking of chapter 5 and 6. So I kind of know what's going to happen in those chapters. And so that does help. That helps me to still have a bit of the plan behind it, but not too much.
Yeah. I don't like to overplan. I just can't. I get too excited. I have to jump in and start writing. And I used to do that, but then my stories would just meander too much because I would get off track. So having a loose outline like you do, Chris, really helps me. And they're not set in stone. A lot of writers don't want to do outlines because they feel like they have to just totally stick to it and you can't deviate. You can always come back to it and change that outline again.
True.
And then you still have a roadmap to follow.
Yeah, and the thing for me, when I even back then, when I had the outlines, the only thing I was outlining were the certain parts of the plot. So I need for this to happen in this chapter and that to happen in that chapter, but the nuances of what happens between the characters, I don't do a plan at all for that. because that's where I like to see what will happen as I'm doing
Yeah.
the writing, like the nuances of the conversation, the things that they reveal to each other between characters. That stuff I don't want to know ahead of time, because then
Yeah.
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 Cool.
You're just like me. Like I've never outlined a chapter. Like I know a lot of writers do a full outline of their whole
Hmm.
book.
Yeah.
And then they'll go and sit down and every single chapter they'll write a huge outline for that just that chapter.
Yeah.
That's great, but I
Yeah.
can't do that.
Yeah. No.
And I'm like you, I love to just know, okay, I know what's going to happen in this chapter, but I
Hmm.
want to figure out like let the characters figure out what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let them
Let the
tell you
characters
what's going to
drive.
happen. Yep.
Yeah,
Hmm.
let them
Yeah.
tell me what's going to
Yeah.
happen.
Yeah.
And I love that. That's how you get to really know your characters, I
Oh
think.
yeah, for sure.
Really get into their head that way.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
the most fun I had with that, there was in one of the stories that's still available on Bella, The Wiles of Esther. There was a chapter that I was writing, and all I put like in the outline was that Esther and this character named Callan, they have an argument. That was all I had, in the outline,
Mhm.
because I needed for them at that moment to have an argument. So I'm writing
Got
out
it.
the
Yeah.
scene, and from his point of view, the Callan character, he went in a completely different direction, became way more of an argument than I had originally had in mind. As I'm writing, I'm like, just go with it and
Yeah.
see where it goes.
Yeah, totally. I love that. So, for anybody who's thinking about self-publishing, what were the things that you hired out? Like, who else did you hire to help you put out your books?
First thing was a cover designer, because I don't have the
Yeah.
skills to design a cover,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
an editor.
Yeah.
And those two have been a fantastic part of my process and my team. I found an editor who has been just fantastic to work with. I can't imagine working with anybody else but her. She's been a huge part of my success, I think.
Awesome.
Um, and of course, like I said, and a fantastic designer for the covers who's great to work with. I come into a cover. I have a couple of ideas of what I want, but they're always kind of vague,
Yeah.
Mm,
because I want to see what she comes up with. And she manages to bring in all these things that go beyond what I had in my mind.
yeah. She's great. So we'll throw her
Uh,
name out. She's also one of my
yes,
friends as well. It's
yes,
Brittany McGill. She
yes.
used to go by Tilly. And her book cover design company is Firefly Designs.
Hmm.
So if anybody wants to check her out on Instagram, go look her up. She's really great, and she's done some
She's
really
fantastic.
great stuff with Chris's books. They're just gorgeous covers,
Yep.
really great. And she's so sweet. I love to just talk to her. So I would love to work with her someday for a cover,
Yep.
for one of my
I
books.
On Instagram a while back, I had teased a prequel idea that I had for Apple Rose, which would set the story back 1 year before the events of the first book. Because
Hmm.
I had this idea of showing Apple and Cindy what their relationship was like before Cindy discovered what Apple was. And so I teased the idea, and I teased the title, and she saw it, and she's like, "Oh, I've got ideas."
She
That's
had a
so
design
cool.
right
I'm like,
away. Yeah.
Yeah.
fantastic.
Yeah, she's done a really great job. And your marketing looks really great. You've done some really great stuff with all of your Apple Rose marketing. Looks very great. And you've done it yourself.
Yes.
So what did you use to do your ad and things that you have on Instagram? They're so great. And they look
I
totally
broke,
professional.
yeah, I finally broke down, and I got a paid subscription to the Book Brush.
Book
And
brush.
yeah,
Okay.
and that's just
Book
been,
brush.
yeah,
I like it.
it's been a nice tool to use, to play around with, to experiment. And I've had a lot of fun just making some fun little ads and that
Yeah, they
kind
look
of stuff. And
amazing.
yeah,
Yeah, so I'm sure they've gotten a lot of attention too. They look
yeah,
Yeah.
amazing.
yeah.
Um, so we're right here, like at the end. So just real quick, you were also in some anthology series.
Hmm.
Um, Real quick, tell us about the ones you were in because they were all kind of linked together.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, the company that did these, they have since they are no longer open. The company,
Oh, that
the
happens so
publishing
much.
house. So yeah, but I did publish. They had a series of anthologies where each story was set in a different place. So there was Dark Paris, which this is kind of the funny thing. When I wrote Apple Rose, the first book, I had written the first book, I published the first book, and then I wrote a story for the Dark Paris anthology, which was with Apple Rose 8 years in the future in Paris. Okay. And this is before I'd even done book 2. So I'd already taken the character in this story, popped her off in the future, put her in Paris, and then had to explain in that story why she was in Paris.
Right.
And then once that was out, I'm like, okay, now I want to write book 2. I have to explain how I get from where she is in book 1 to Paris, like all those years later. So then I wrote book 2 to answer that question.
And you didn't have that in your mind when you wrote the story for the anthology?
No. Wow. Yeah, no. I just did it just for fun, and so now the third book that comes out on October 31st, it gets us a little bit closer to that moment in Paris. Book 4 will be the novel, the full version of that short story that was in that Dark Paris anthology. I'm really excited to be there. Yeah.
Do you have a timeline written down somewhere so that you make sure that you're following along?
I have had to now. The funny thing with
I can see that. Yeah.
Good question.
The funny thing with Apple Rose too, I have a timeline. I realized as I'm writing the third book, I can't keep track of who she's killed and how many and what their names were.
Oh my goodness.
And so I had to write a chart. And so I wrote down the chart on Excel, and I wrote down a chart of the people she killed when she was in high school, the people she killed there, and so I've got this like a list of how many people she's killed and their names. And that was the fun thing too. I went on Instagram and on Threads, and I asked my readers and anyone that saw it, if you know a guy that's in your life that was an asshole to you, he treated you poorly, and you would like to see him be killed in these books, give me your name. Give me his name, and I'll take his name, his first name, and he'll be a character that she killed. And the response was crazy.
Chris, it's funny. I was talking with Heather before our episode here, how I've been following you on Facebook and Instagram a little bit. I didn't know you were going to be the guest on the show. But now that you say that, I remember reading that. I was like, oh my God, what a way to get engagement from your readers. And when you said it, I'm like, I didn't realize it was you. When you said that, I was like, I remember reading that and thought that was a fantastic way for engagement.
Yeah, the response was fantastic. I got all these names, and I filled out that entire chart with names that people had, that gave me. And so, yeah.
That's a trip. I love that.
Yeah, I do. That is fantastic.
Yeah.
So tell us about the newest book coming out October 31st, where we can get it, kind of set it up for us a little bit, but where are we in her story in book 3?
10 years have passed between the end of the first 2 books. Apple and Cindy are no longer together. They're apart, not by choice. I won't reveal all that much about that because you have to read book 2 to figure out what happened.
Right.
Apple is in Scotland. She's living under a fake, name. She's no longer living under her Apple Rose name. Cindy is back home. She's returned home. She had moved away from home after she graduated from high school, became a cop. She's now come back to her hometown to become a detective. And the main premise of this is that there is someone who's after Apple Rose.
Right.
And he's determined to do anything he can to find her, and it's very personal for him.
Okay.
The reason why he's going after her. So you got Apple Rose in Scotland just trying to stay off the radar and hidden. You've got Cindy, who's now come home trying to protect the people that Apple had to leave behind.
Right.
So that's sort of where we are at that point in the story. It's going to be available wherever you can get books, Amazon, Apple, Kobo Plus, for those who would like that.
So ebook and print.
Yes.
Yes, and you will have signed copies available as well?
I started a trend with my Apple Rose paperbacks. Each paperback includes a sketch that's on the last page. So there might be a bit of a delay on the print because I need to get that sketch put together. But So
That's
it may not
cool.
be on October 31st, but once I get that sketch done, yes, it will come after.
Yeah,
Wow.
so the ebook will definitely be out
Yes,
on
yes,
Halloween. Okay,
yeah,
great. That
yeah,
is, and what a great day to have a book debut too, a book launch
yes,
Right.
on
Yeah.
August
Yeah.
on Halloween. That is so
yeah,
cool.
And the first one
So,
in the series you released on the 31st, right?
yes, yes,
Yeah, you did.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
did you release them all on Halloween?
I released the
Did
first one
I?
Halloween. The next one I released on my birthday, just because I wanted to.
Why not?
When's your
Right?
birthday
Yeah.
I
again?
said, "What the heck?" And then, yeah, on the 31st for this one. So
Yeah,
Yeah.
awesome. So, for everyone listening, we have Chris's links. You can check out all of his works up to date, our ebook and print, except for the Kindle Vella series, of course. So much to read and explore. You've got his merch you can check out. So, please go check out Chris's stuff. You will not regret it. I promise. It's amazing. Scenes stick with you forever. I promise. There are just some scenes I can't get out of my mind, but in a good way. In a
And
good
I was just going to say, is that a good
way.
thing or a bad thing?
I was telling Keith before, I was like, Chris has a way of like ripping your heart out and stomping on it a little bit, and then he'll put it back in, stitch it up. You think you're okay, and then he rips it back
And
out
do it
again
again.
and does it all over again. And it's just,
Yeah.
oh wow, just amazing how you can make me feel so much when I read. It's amazing.
Yeah.
well, and I know you said you had not yet gotten to the finale for my first series,
Right, elegy.
Seas of Angels. I will tease
Yeah.
one thing. There's going to be a moment towards the end when I promise you'll get very angry at me.
I
Uh-oh.
remember you wrote in the inscription, I hope you don't throw the book at the wall
Yes,
when you read this or something like that.
stick with it because that's all I'll say. Don't. I've had a reader who got to that point and she said, "I didn't want to continue reading. I was so angry at you. I tossed the book."
Oh.
And I said, "No, no, pick it up, pick it up. I promise you, you'll be happy."
Okay, great.
So
Awesome.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, I can't wait to get back into that. I've got to finish the book. I'm reading a saga right now. So when I'm done with it, I'm going to get back into the Season of Angels and then jump into
yeah,
Apple Rose, like the actual novel.
yeah, yeah.
Wow.
And there's also a chapter in this new book that's coming out on 31st that I kid you not was the the most violent piece of writing I've ever put to the page before.
Oh wow.
Oh, wow.
For an entire chapter with one break in between. So be ready
Oh
for that
wow.
one.
Okay.
As I decided after all that I've written with Apple Rose, I needed to take her off the leash, and she has her
Oh
fun.
boy.
Yes.
Oh, I imagine she
Wow.
does.
Hey, Chris, I know you do self publishing. Have you
Mhm.
considered looking into audiobooks at all?
My first book is available in
Is it?
Audible. Yes. Yes.
I'm glad you said that because everything I read is through audiobook. I listen to audiobooks
Yeah.
daily, so it's good to know.
Yeah, I've got the first book on Audible, and I just a month, not quite a month ago, the narrator she reached out to me. She said, "So I heard you're doing some more books. Would you like to work together
Yeah,
again?" I'm like, "Yes, I would."
fantastic,
Awesome.
So yeah,
fantastic. Good to
Great. So
know.
we have a
Good
lot
to
to
know.
look forward to.
yes,
Yeah. So,
All
Chris,
right.
thanks so much for taking time out of your very, very busy schedule
Very
to
busy
talk
thank
to
you.
schedule.
us. So much cool stuff that you write and so much that you do. And it's really cool for like newer writers to look and see what all you can accomplish as a self-published writer. You don't
Yeah,
have to go trad, you know,
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
you can do so much on your own. So,
yeah.
very cool. So,
And I think one final thing I would say as the takeaway is just to keep at it. For me, for 10 years, like I said, I would finish a bit of a chapter, I'd stop, my life would sort of get in the way, and I never thought that I could. I always thought like this
right,
is just a dream that I can't do. And
right.
then I enrolled in school at college. I took a there was in one of the classes I was taking at college was a writing course, and the project for that course was to write the first chapter for a book. So I took that first chapter of a book and I submitted that as my final project, and I worked with the classmates and I worked with my teacher on it, and I was so inspired by the feedback that I had gotten from my instructor and from my schoolmates that I finished that book by the end of the class,
Wow.
not
Oh,
just a chapter.
wow.
Yeah, and so it's so sometimes you will be surprised if you can find something to inspire you to work,
Mm-hmm.
continue to work past your doubts, your insecurities, and that class was a huge part and a catalyst for me to end up where I am, today.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
Yeah.
That is a great story. It's pretty amazing to me. Like, you have upwards of 3,000 followers on Instagram, which is that your main focus for social media, Instagram?
There and on that new platform that Meta had released, Threads.
Yeah, okay. I'm not really familiar with that yet, so I'll have to kind of play around. I'm not a huge social media guy, so
yeah.
But I mean, from a guy who took 10 years to write a book, did it all on his own, doing all your own promotions and all that kind of stuff. You've built quite a following. Merchandise looks fantastic and fun. Good for you. You're definitely an inspiration. Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely.
Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Heather, I'm so glad to have you back. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's been great.
I've really enjoyed how you brought Chris out and shared his journey. And yeah, it was a fun episode, guys. Thank you so much.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you guys for the invitation.
Absolutely. Open invitation to have you back as well, Chris.
Yeah, for book 4.
Yeah.
Yeah, sometime next year, hopefully.
Yeah.
All right, guys.
Look forward to it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Join us next time when we welcome editor, poet, and fiction writer Edward Ahern. After a work career of a self-proclaimed enjoyably demented hopscotch game, Ed retired into writing, where he now tries to write 2 stories and 2 poems a month. He has several awards and honorable mentions for over 450 poems and stories and 9 books. The poems and stories have appeared in 24 countries and, counting reprints, over 600 publications. Join us next time on the Brewing Fiction Podcast. Thanks for stopping by. We'll see you next week. Cheers.